Welcome to the cutting edge of GTM Talk. You're tuning in to the first ever AI-powered go-to-market podcast, brought to you by Exordium. Our AI podcasters provide an educated and impartial view on the discussion topics that are widely relevant in today's business landscape. Join us as this series will dive into all the different disruptive end-to-end go-to-market strategies, from marketing and sales to customer success. The main objective is to share practical strategies and execution plans to help you drive the most effective go-to-market outcomes. In our last episode, we broke down why offshoring talent is essential for tech startups to survive in today's market. In this episode, we're taking it a step further. We're diving deep into real-world success stories, including a special guest who was initially skeptical about offshoring, but he was pleasantly surprised by the results he got. Make sure to follow us on Spotify and YouTube so you never miss an episode. Let's get into it.
Offshoring. It's been kind of a hot topic, hasn't it? Especially for startups. Seems like everyone's talking about it.
It is, and for good reason, I think, especially when you're trying to, really scale up quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, and, we touched on this a bit in our last deep dive.
Right, looking at kind of the financial side of things for tech startups going into 2025.
Exactly, and I think that's why it's so fascinating to hear from someone like Rich McVeigh.
Absolutely, head of revenue operations at Firstbase. Can't get much more real world than that.
Yeah, and, for folks who aren't familiar.
Firstbase is a company that basically handles all the logistics for remote teams all over the world.
Wow, all the logistics. So we're talking
everything. Laptops, headsets, you name it. They make sure remote teams have what they need wherever they are.
And they've grown like crazy, haven't they?
5 times bigger in just 18 months. It's mind-blowing.
That's during the same time that Rich has been building and managing these offshore teams.
Yeah, so he's right in the thick of it, seeing what works, what doesn't.
So that's exactly what we want to do today, right?
Unpack his journey, what surprised him, what went well, all the good stuff.
And hopefully our listeners can take away some gems, apply it to their own businesses.
Exactly, because let's face it, not everyone's jumping on the offshoring bandwagon right away.
Yeah, Rich himself started out pretty skeptical, right?
He did. Had a lot of those same concerns you hear from people.
I bet. Communication issues, cultural differences, quality of work, that kind of thing.
Exactly, all the usual suspects. But what's so interesting is that what he actually found was quite the opposite.
Oh, really? So did it turn out to be a disaster?
No, not at all. In fact, he actually said that his offshore team members were some of his hardest workers.
Wow, that's a pretty big turnaround from his initial skepticism.
It is. And, a big part of that he credits to having strong enablement and training programs in place.
Right. You can't just expect people to thrive without the right support, no matter where they are.
Exactly. Invest in the tools, the knowledge, set them up for success.
And it paid off for him big time, right?
Big time. Huge results in their outbound efforts. Even saw their inbound lead conversion rates jump up.
That's amazing. How did they manage that?
Well, one of the big advantages is the time zone difference.
Right. You can have someone available 24/7 to handle those inbound leads.
Exactly. No opportunity slips through the cracks.
That's something a lot of companies struggle with, even with local teams.
It is. It's a game changer. And it's really interesting to compare Rich's experiences at different companies.
Yeah. He was at Zuora before, right? And OpenGov.
That's right. Very different environments, different challenges.
So at Zuora, he was managing a huge team of SDRs, like 45 of them.
Wow, that's a lot of SDRs.
It was, and these were top-notch SDRs, really talented.
But there wasn't a lot of room for them to move up, was there?
Not really, which is a common problem in larger organizations.
It is. It's tough to climb that corporate ladder sometimes.
And then at OpenGov, it was a totally different ballgame.
Much longer sales cycle, very complex deals.
And what he really appreciated there was their honesty about those timelines.
Transparency is key, especially in sales.
Absolutely. So it seems like he's taken the best of both worlds and applied it to Firstbase.
He has focus on growth, internal promotions, but also strategically using offshore talent.
It's a nice blend. So let's break down some of the specific advantages he highlighted about offshoring.
Okay, let's do it.
Well, team consistency was a big one for him.
Right, having a stable, reliable group, that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Impacts productivity, morale, the whole 9 yards.
And of course, we've got to mention the time zone coverage again.
Oh yeah, that's a huge plus. Opens up so many possibilities.
But what really blew him away was the ramp-up time.
How fast they could get up and running, right?
Exactly. His offshore team was fully productive within a month.
Wow, that's incredible. Talk about hitting the ground running.
It is. And it's even more impressive?
What's that?
He actually had an offshore team member who ended up outperforming previous onshore hires.
So they were exceeding expectations left and right.
They were, which makes you wonder, how does he find these amazing people?
Right. What's his secret?
Well, you might be surprised to hear this, but he looks for natural curiosity.
Curiosity. That's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about sales.
I know, right? But he's got a good point.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's his reasoning?
He believes that someone who's genuinely curious is going to be more engaged, eager to learn, and ultimately more successful.
Makes sense when you put it that way.
And he doesn't stop there. He also digs into their learning experiences outside of work.
Oh, interesting. So like what books are they reading? What courses are they taking?
Exactly. He's looking for that intellectual curiosity, that desire to grow beyond the job description.
So it's not just about clocking in and out. It's about a passion for learning.
Exactly. And he's found that this approach leads him to people with a fresh perspective.
So they're bringing something new to the table.
They are. They're not just cookie-cutter SDRs. They've got a broader way of thinking.
Now, I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering about integration.
How do you make sure these offshore team members feel like they're really part of the company culture?
Right, exactly, because that could be a challenge when you're working with people all over the world.
It can, but Rich seems to have figured it out.
So what's he doing?
Well, he talked about how active his offshore team members are in their stand-up meetings and on Slack.
They're not just sitting there silently. They're actively contributing.
Oh, yeah. They're bringing new ideas, creative solutions. They're full participants.
In fact, I think he used the phrase "through the roof" to describe their participation.
He did, which says a lot about the kind of team environment he's created.
One that transcends geographical boundaries. That's amazing.
It is, and we can't forget about the numbers.
Right, the bottom line.
Exactly. So Rich's initial goal was to have a 2.1 ratio of AEs to SDRs.
Which is pretty standard in sales, right?
It is. Make sure you've got a balanced pipeline.
And he initially estimated that offshore performance would be around 70% of what he'd expect from an onshore SDR.
A pretty conservative estimate, I'd say.
But you know what? The reality was much better.
Oh, yeah, much better. They were performing closer to 90%.
Wow, so they were blowing those initial estimates out of the water.
They were, which really debunks that myth that offshore talent can't match up.
And what kind of work were they doing? Was it just busy work?
No, they were handling high-value activities.
Like what?
Qualifying leads, scheduling meetings, even stuff like list building.
Which can be a huge time suck for AEs.
It is, so this frees up the AEs to focus on closing deals.
It's all about strategic delegation.
Exactly, using everyone's strengths to optimize the whole process.
Now, let's be real. We can't ignore the financial aspect.
But of course not. It's a major factor for a lot of companies.
And Rich was very transparent about the fact that offshore resources are more cost-effective.
Especially compared to hiring SDRs in the U.S.
Oh yeah, the cost of living here is crazy.
It is, so you're saving on salaries, benefits, office space, the list goes on.
And those savings can really add up, right?
They do. You can reinvest that money back into your business.
Now, one thing that often comes up with offshoring is the language barrier.
Especially in sales, where communication is so key.
Absolutely. But Rich's experience challenges that assumption.
He specifically chose to hire from the Philippines.
Which actually ranks really high globally in English proficiency.
Around 30th in the world, I think.
And from his experience, his team members speak excellent English.
Minimal accent issues. Very clear and easy to understand.
So communication hasn't been a problem at all.
Not at all. And, he had a great experience working with a company called Exordium Talent.
Oh, they helped him source and hire his offshore team.
They did. And he was really impressed with their approach.
What stood out to him?
Well, for one, they found qualified candidates quickly.
So no long, drawn-out hiring process?
Nope, and the billing and admin side of things was super straightforward.
Always a plus.
But what he really appreciated was their proactive communication.
Like keeping him in the loop, anticipating potential issues.
Exactly. For example, they were very on top of holiday handling.
Making sure everything ran smoothly, even with those cultural differences.
That's great. Takes a lot of stress off your plate.
And just to give you an idea of the timeline, he interviewed about 12 people over 3 weeks before finding the right fit.
So he wasn't rushing into it. He took his time.
And his overall conclusion: augmenting his team with offshore resources has been the best approach for Firstbase.
That's fantastic. So what are some of the key reasons for that?
Well, it's given him more time to focus on the strategic stuff,
Like actually selling, building relationships,
Exactly, instead of getting bogged down in the day-to-day tasks.
which his offshore team can handle effectively.
And it's also allowed him to implement a multi-channel approach to prospecting.
Reaching more potential customers in different ways.
Exactly. So it's not just about saving money, it's about strategic growth.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting?
Okay.
This all aligns with what we're seeing in the business world in general.
You mean offshoring becoming more and more common?
Exactly. It's not just a niche strategy anymore.
It's becoming a necessity for startups that want to compete.
A sign of the times, I guess.
So as we continue this deep dive into Rich's experience, let's keep all of this in mind.
Absolutely. We'll explore his specific approaches, the challenges he faced, the lessons he learned.
Stay tuned. There's much more to unpack. We were talking about how important it is to build that right environment for your offshore team, so they can really thrive.
Yeah, it's not just about, finding people with the right skills on paper.
It's about making them feel like they're a real part of the team.
Exactly. Valued, supported.
And I think Rich made a really good point about communication being key, especially when you're dealing with those cultural gaps.
Oh, absolutely. Being crystal clear, especially at the beginning when you're building those relationships.
And having patience too, right? Because not everyone communicates in the same way.
No, not at all. You got to remember those nuances, how direct people are, how they give feedback. Even humor can be different.
Well, yeah, for sure. So being aware of those differences and adapting can really help build that trust.
It does. It's all about finding that balance where everyone feels comfortable, being open and honest.
And that's where I think Rich's focus on hiring curious people comes in.
It does, because they're more likely to adapt, to ask questions when they don't understand.
Right. They're not afraid to clarify, to seek feedback, all those things that are so important when you're working across cultures.
And the other thing that's super important is setting clear expectations from the start.
Oh, yeah, no matter who you're working with, but especially when you've got those time zones and cultural differences to consider.
Exactly. Rich was very clear about setting goals, roles, responsibilities, all of that up front.
So it's not just about what they need to do, but how their work fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah, and having those regular check-ins, the feedback loops to make sure everyone's on track.
And I think technology plays a huge role here too, right?
Oh, absolutely. All those tools, project management software, video conferencing, instant messaging.
Helps keep everyone connected, no matter where they are.
Rich talked about using a mix of tools to stay in touch, keep everyone in the loop.
But it's not just about the tools themselves, it's about how you use them to build that sense of community.
Right, like having those dedicated Slack channels for more social stuff, doing virtual team building.
Even encouraging people to share pictures, stories, those little things that build those human connections.
Exactly, because those connections are what make a team really work well together.
So let's talk about the financial side of things, because Rich was very open about the cost savings.
Yeah, that's a big attraction for a lot of companies, especially those just starting out.
And he actually broke down the costs, hiring locally versus offshore, and the difference was pretty significant.
Oh, yeah. Salaries, benefits, office space, even things like payroll taxes, it all adds up.
And those savings can really free up resources to invest in other areas of the business.
They can, but Rich also made a good point about not just looking at it as a way to cut costs.
You got to balance that with finding good people and treating them fairly.
Exactly. He believes in paying fair wages, offering benefits that are competitive, being ethical.
Finding that sweet spot where everyone benefits.
And of course, we can't forget about the legal side of things, all those regulations.
There's a lot to navigate there, which is why it's so important to work with partners who really know what they're doing.
Absolutely. Rich mentioned relying on his legal team, external consultants, to make sure everything's above board.
So contracts, taxes, intellectual property, data privacy, all of that needs to be handled properly.
And it's not just about checking boxes, it's about doing right by your team and building a sustainable business.
And another thing that comes up a lot is the language barrier, especially for roles where you need to communicate a lot with clients.
It's a valid concern, but Rich's experience actually shows that it doesn't have to be a major obstacle.
He specifically chose to hire from the Philippines, where English is widely spoken.
And he hasn't had any major issues with communication. His team's very fluent.
Yeah, he even commented on how well they adapt their communication style to different audiences.
Shows how strong their English skills are, and it highlights how important that screening process is.
Absolutely. You want to make sure you're hiring people with excellent communication skills, both written and spoken.
Rich does interviews in English, uses assessments, even trial projects to see how they perform.
So let's talk about onboarding, because that's a crucial step in setting those offshore team members up for success.
Oh, yeah. You want to make that transition as smooth as possible.
So Rich provides comprehensive training, company policies, product info, best practices, all of that.
And he assigns them a mentor, someone on the team, to guide them through those first few weeks. Answer any questions.
And that regular communication, that feedback, helps them feel supported, like they're part of the team.
Now, how about managing and motivating the team? What are some of Rich's strategies?
Well, he's big on setting clear goals and expectations, but also giving people the freedom to achieve those goals in their own way.
That autonomy can be really motivating.
It is. And he also makes sure to provide feedback, recognize accomplishments, celebrate those wins.
Builds morale, shows that their work is valued.
And he encourages continuous learning, professional development, even allocates budget for courses, certifications.
Wow, that's a great perk.
It is. Shows that he's invested in their growth, not just their output.
Now, what about building those relationships, those connections with the offshore team?
Rich is a big believer in regular communication, both formal and informal.
So team meetings, one-on-ones, but also just casual conversations.
Yeah, building that rapport, that camaraderie, even doing virtual team building activities, social events.
It's about creating a sense of belonging, even when you're miles apart.
And he's also very mindful of cultural sensitivity, encouraging people to learn about each other's cultures, celebrating holidays.
Creating that inclusive environment where everyone feels respected.
And of course, when you're working with teams across time zones, you got to have strategies to manage those differences.
It can be tricky, but Rich uses things like shared calendars, scheduling apps to keep everyone coordinated.
And he encourages asynchronous communication too. Email, project management software, for things that don't need immediate responses.
Right, finding that balance, maximizing efficiency, minimizing frustration.
And you know what? Rich actually mentioned some unexpected benefits of offshoring.
Oh, like what? I'm intrigued.
He said working with a global team has really opened his eyes to new perspectives, new ideas.
Makes sense. You're exposed to different ways of thinking, different approaches.
Different cultural norms around work, different communication styles. It's all a learning experience.
And that can be incredibly valuable for a leader, broadens your horizons.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think one of the key takeaways is that offshoring is not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. It's not a magic wand. It takes planning, careful execution.
You got to find the right people, build that strong foundation of trust, navigate all the complexities.
And when it's done well, it can be a really powerful strategy for growth.
Rich's story is a great example of that. But as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's think about the bigger picture.
Okay, the broader implications of offshoring, how it's changing the way we work.
It's a fascinating topic with a lot to unpack. You know, we've been digging into Rich's story and his success with offshoring, but it's bigger than just one company, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's like this whole shift happening in how we think about work, where we work.
Like that traditional idea of everyone being in one office, it's fading fast.
It is. Companies are realizing that the best talent might be anywhere in the world.
And technology is a big part of that, right? We have the tools now to connect, collaborate, no matter where you are.
Absolutely. Video calls, project management apps, instant messaging, it's all made it so much easier to work with teams across borders.
And it's not just about being easier, it's about finding those amazing people you might not have access to otherwise.
Right. Rich mentioned how he found incredibly talented people in the Philippines who might not have had the same opportunities closer to home.
So it's a win-win. Companies find the talent they need, and individuals get new opportunities they might not have had before.
Exactly. And I think this is just the beginning. As more companies embrace remote work, the demand for global talent is only going to grow.
Rich even said he could see a future where entire companies are fully distributed, no central office at all.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea, but it's exciting too, isn't it?
It is. Imagine building a team with the best people from all over the world.
The potential for innovation, creativity, it's huge.
But it's not without its challenges, right?
Right.
Managing a global team is different. You got to be more aware of those cultural nuances.
Oh, absolutely. Communication is even more important. Building trust across time zones and cultures takes real effort.
And we can't forget about the ethical side, making sure labor practices are fair, complying with regulations in different countries.
It's got to be sustainable, responsible, benefiting everyone involved.
And it's not just about companies changing. Individuals need to adapt too, right?
Definitely. The skills that are in demand are changing. It's not just about technical skills anymore.
So those soft skills, communication, collaboration, problem solving, those are becoming even more important.
And being able to work effectively across cultures. Understanding different communication styles, different ways of doing business.
It's about being adaptable, being open to new ways of thinking.
And having that growth mindset, always willing to learn, embrace new challenges.
Because the world of work is changing fast,
Mhm.
and those who can adapt are the ones who are going to thrive.
It's about being comfortable with uncertainty, seeking feedback, constantly improving.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rich's offshoring experience, it's clear that it's just one part of a much bigger story.
The story of how work is evolving, how globalization is changing the game.
And it's a story that's still being written, right?
It is full of challenges and opportunities, and the question is, what role are we going to play in shaping it?
Will we embrace those possibilities, build a more inclusive, interconnected global workforce?
That's the question we all need to ask ourselves.
And I think Rich's journey gives us a lot to think about, a lot to learn from.
It does. It's inspiring. It's challenging. It makes you rethink what's possible.
So whether you're a business leader considering offshoring or someone just trying to navigate this new world of work,
Rich's story has something for everyone. It's about thinking differently, breaking down barriers, and building a future that works for all of us.
thanks for joining us on this deep dive into offshoring. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Catch you later.
Before you go, be sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell icon to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. We'll be sharing real-world customer outcomes that highlight the benefits of offshore GTM, diving into the era of reduced venture capital, discussing the new realities tech companies face, talk about founder mode in GTM, and more. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.